For 30 years, Daniel gave his family everything he had and asked for almost nothing in return. He paid bills he could barely afford, gave up dreams he never told anyone about, and quietly stood behind the people he loved whenever life became difficult. But one ordinary evening, his family said something that made him stop defending them. They told him, "You've done enough. We don't need you anymore." Daniel simply nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just walked out of the room. And what his family discovered after he was gone made them realize that the comfortable life they had taken for granted had been built almost entirely on one man's silent sacrifices. Daniel Mercer had never been the kind of father who demanded applause. He believed that if you truly loved your family, you didn't keep a record of what you had given them. So he gave. When his children were young, Daniel worked long hours at a small repair shop. He often came home exhausted, his hands stained with grease, but he would still sit at the kitchen table and help his children with their homework. His wife, Margaret, used to tell him one day, "They'll understand everything you've done." Daniel would smile. "I don't need them to understand," he would answer. "I just need them to be okay." Years passed. His daughter Claire became a successful accountant. His son Ryan started a business. From the outside, they looked like a happy, successful family. But nobody knew how much Daniel had quietly sacrificed to make that success possible. When Claire needed money for college, Daniel sold the old motorcycle he had spent years saving for. When Ryan's business nearly collapsed, Daniel used the savings he had kept for his retirement. When Margaret became ill, Daniel reduced his working hours so he could take care of her. And when everyone else was sleeping, Daniel would sit alone at the kitchen table, looking at his bank account and wondering how he was going to rebuild his future. He never told anyone, not even his children. He kept saying the same thing: "They're my family. That's what fathers do." Then Margaret passed away. Her death changed Daniel in ways nobody noticed. The house became strangely quiet. The chair where she used to sit remained empty. The kitchen still smelled like her favorite tea, but there was no one waiting for him anymore. Claire and Ryan visited less often. At first, they were busy. Then they became too busy. Eventually, Daniel became the person everyone called when something went wrong. "Dad, can you help me with this? Dad, I need a favor. Dad, could you cover this payment?" And Daniel always said yes. He never asked for anything. Until one Friday evening, Claire and Ryan had come to Daniel's house because they wanted him to sign some papers concerning the family property. Daniel placed the documents on the table and looked at them carefully. "What exactly am I signing?" Ryan sighed. "Dad, it's just paperwork. We're trying to simplify everything." Daniel looked at his son. "Everything." Ryan avoided his eyes. Claire finally spoke. "Dad, you need to start thinking about the future. You're getting older. You can't keep controlling everything." Daniel was confused. "I never controlled anything." Ryan leaned back. "You gave us the house. You paid for our education. You helped with the business. You helped Mom. You've done enough." Daniel stared at him. There was something strange about the way Ryan said those words. Not gratitude, relief, as though Daniel's sacrifices had become an inconvenience. Claire looked down at the papers. "We think it would be better if you moved into a smaller place." Daniel's fingers slowly tightened around the edge of the table. "You want me to leave my home?" Nobody answered immediately. Then Ryan said the sentence Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. "Dad, this house isn't really useful to you anymore." Silence filled the room. Daniel looked around. The walls were covered with photographs. Claire's graduation, Ryan's first business opening, Margaret smiling beside him. Every photograph carried a memory. And suddenly Daniel understood something painful. His children didn't remember the sacrifices. They remembered the results. They remembered the house, the education, the business, the comfortable life. But they had forgotten the man who had quietly paid the price for all of it. Daniel stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't insult them. He simply pushed the papers back across the table. "You're right," he said softly. Claire looked surprised. "Dad, I have done enough." Ryan smiled slightly, thinking he had won. But Daniel continued. "And from tonight, I'm going to stop doing what I should have stopped doing years ago." He walked upstairs. For the first time in his life, he opened an old metal box he had kept hidden in his closet. Inside were receipts, bank statements, old loan documents, tuition payments, medical bills, business transfers, and letters. Hundreds of pages documenting 30 years of sacrifices. Daniel didn't keep them because he wanted money back. He kept them because Margaret had once told him, "If our children ever forget what you did, at least you'll have proof that you never failed them." The next morning, Daniel met with an attorney. He didn't try to punish his children. He simply protected what remained of his future. The family house was legally his, the savings he had rebuilt belonged to him, and the money he had quietly promised to help Ryan with was no longer available. Daniel moved into a smaller, peaceful home near a quiet lake. For the first time in decades, he woke up without an alarm. He cooked breakfast for himself. He walked in the mornings. He started repairing old radios again, a hobby he had abandoned when his family needed him. And slowly, he began to feel like himself. Then Ryan's business began struggling. Without Daniel's financial support, the cracks became impossible to hide. Ryan called, "Dad, I need your help." Daniel listened quietly. "I can't." "Why not?" Daniel looked through the window. "Because you told me I had done enough." Ryan went silent. A few days later, Claire arrived at Daniel's new home. She stood at the door with tears in her eyes. "Dad, can we talk?" Daniel let her inside. She placed a folder on the table. "What is this?" Claire opened it. Inside were copies of the old financial records she had discovered after going through some family documents. She had finally seen the numbers. The college tuition, the money for Ryan's business, the medical expenses, the years Daniel had worked extra hours, the retirement savings he had sacrificed. Claire covered her mouth. "I didn't know." Daniel nodded. "I know. You never told us. You never asked." Those 3 words broke her heart. Claire began crying. "We thought you were just Dad." Daniel looked at her gently. That was the problem. Claire didn't understand. Daniel smiled subtly. "You saw the father who was always there. You never saw the man who was getting tired." For the first time, Claire realized what her father had meant. His sacrifices had become invisible because he had never complained about them. Ryan eventually came to. He didn't bring papers. He didn't bring excuses. He simply stood in the doorway. "Dad." Daniel looked at him. Ryan's voice shook. "I was wrong." Daniel didn't answer immediately. Ryan continued, "I thought everything we had was something we had earned ourselves." Daniel lowered his eyes. "You did work hard." Ryan shook his head. "Not alone." That sentence meant more to Daniel than an apology ever could. Because finally, after all those years, his son understood. The greatest pain wasn't that his children had taken his sacrifices for granted. It was that Daniel had spent so many years believing that silence was the only way to love them. He had confused sacrifice with disappearing. He had forgotten that love also requires being seen, respected, and valued. Months later, Daniel invited Claire and Ryan to dinner. There was no anger at the table, no arguments, no paperwork, just 3 people trying to rebuild something that money could never buy. Ryan looked at his father and said, "Dad, if you could go back, would you change anything?" Daniel thought for a long moment. "Yes." Ryan looked surprised. "What?" Daniel smiled. "I would still love you. But I would teach you that love doesn't mean giving everything away until nothing is left of yourself." The room became quiet. Claire reached across the table and held her father's hand. And Daniel finally understood something Margaret had known all along. A sacrifice may be forgotten when it is given quietly, but that doesn't make it meaningless. Sometimes people don't understand your value until your constant presence is no longer guaranteed. And sometimes the strongest revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's simply learning to stop abandoning yourself for people who never learned how to appreciate you. Daniel never demanded his children repay 30 years of sacrifices. He didn't need their money. He didn't need their guilt. He needed something far simpler: recognition. Years later, Claire would tell her own children about their grandfather. She would say, "Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the weight of everyone else." And Daniel, he finally lived the life he had spent decades postponing. Not because he stopped loving his family, but because he finally learned that loving your family should never require you to disappear from your own life. Sometimes people realize your worth only after you stop proving it to them. And sometimes the most powerful moment isn't when you walk away from someone. It's when you finally walk back toward yourself.